Okay, so from this point onwards, the session will be recorded and this recording will be made available on our YouTube. Popping back over to the presentation, we're going to understand how you can really fuel the classroom with OneNote, how it can benefit your pupils, your staff, and also how it could possibly enrich the learning for those pupils you've got with you, or students if you're secondary based. One of the things that we're going to offer you this afternoon is the opportunity to become an MIE. And becoming a Microsoft Innovative Educator means that you've spent a couple of hours completing a qualification by just joining me today on this OneNote session. You can become an MIE if you already have a sign up to the Microsoft Education Center. You can sign in, and later on there will be a code to redeem which will give you an MIE qualification. If you don't have an account for the MEC or the Microsoft Education Center, now's the opportunity to do so. So I'm just going to pause for about a minute and a half while people get logged into those accounts, or if you haven't got one yet, you can create an account and then they'll be used to redeem those points at the end. It's 1,000 points, which means you become an MIE just from attending this session. So I'll leave that link on screen. If you open up a search engine in a web browser, search for Microsoft Education Center. When you arrive, as you can see from the fingers pointing in the top right hand corner of the screen, hit the sign in button. And if you have an account, sign in. If not, sign up, and then you'll be able to redeem the code that I'm going to give you later on in the session. So I'll just pause a moment while you do that.
Or go into Molly's. Did Molly say it's on the board? Sorry.
Just a moment longer to complete that login, and then keep that handy for the code later. Okay, we'll continue through for the afternoon. So the idea of the MEC is that you can become qualified, and whether it's you want to complete some personal study or it's for your own CPD in school, there's lots of different courses around all aspects of Microsoft 365 and all the apps that are available in there. First of all, with 1,000 points, you become an MIE or a certified MIE, which you'll do by the end of today's session. If you then are really passionate about understanding how you can get the most out of M365, you can make an application to join this year's upcoming, or should I say this academic year's upcoming MIE Expert program. At Turn On, we will also have a course for that, so I'll be running that with a couple of cohorts through from the spring into the summer. We'll support you in how to submit your application, which you send into Microsoft, and if you're successful from that application, you'll be able to become a MIE expert. It then might lead you on to becoming a showcase school and other options too. If you then get heavily involved in it, you can become an Mie Trainer or an Mie Fellow, and there's lots of different routes to take. So it starts with a small accreditation, but some people get hooked and it leads you down the rabbit hole into other greater, bigger things. For the training this afternoon, we're going to have a look at some key areas. We're going to understand how that OneNote class notebook can be used for classroom learning, could also be used for distance learning. We're all facing challenges of reaching pupils and students that aren't necessarily in front of us. It's an ever-changing educational landscape currently, so OneNote can help you with that. We'll also then explore how you can craft and develop and structure those OneNote books so that the resources available to the pupils or students help them with their learning. It might support them when you're not there. It might also be something to reflect upon from their prior learning. We'll look at the tools we've got in OneNote to help you achieve that, and we'll look at things such as how to put multimedia into pages as well as text and pictures and so forth. There'll be opportunity for question and answers throughout, so don't fret. If you've got something that's a burning issue, it won't be too long before I pause. I promise I won't just talk at you all afternoon. We're going to look at OneNote class notebook specifically, and that's what this training focuses on, although there is OneNote. And there is an important way to distinguish between the two, and that's the fact that there's lots of learning focused tools in OneNote class notebook that you wouldn't find in OneNote. OneNote and Teams are like best buddies, and they go hand in hand together. And although you could use OneNote in isolation, you also would get the most out of it through using it inside of a team. We're going to have a look at that in detail throughout this session. I often get asked, well, how on earth do I distinguish between what I get in different types of teams? So you can see here the 4 different types of teams that will be created. You get class teams, which tend to be used for teaching and learning, PLCs, and they end up being used usually for bigger organizations, things like trusts or central teams that might be behind offices. You then get staff, which, as it says, best suit usually staff teams that are involved with organising schools and running them on a daily basis, but you could also get other teams. You can see there that the only team type that gets a OneNote class notebook is a class team. So if you currently are only enrolled into one of the other types of teams there, PLC, staff or other, you won't get access to some of the tools that we're going to show you this afternoon. You need to be embedded in and linked with a class team. I'll show you in a little bit how to do that. But linking through, one of the first considerations are, well, I could get to OneNote in various different ways. You'll probably have realized if you were using a Windows 10 laptop that Windows 10 comes with the OneNote app built in. If you additionally have Office 2019 or local Office 365, which is installed on your laptop or your desktop computer, you will also have a different type of OneNote there available. And then you'll have a third type of OneNote is available, and that's the online version. It's part of M365. They are all slightly different in the way that they structure the layout, and they have a few tools that are in one version that's not in another version, and there is no unified version currently. I am going to focus on using the online version today because it's the one that's most readily available for pupils and staff, and it has a lot of the functions in there, but they may be the odd bit that you're using in a locally installed version or the version that's in Windows 10 that I'm not necessarily going to focus on this afternoon, but they aren't anything that's a game changer from a learning perspective or running a school. It's just the way that the product is made currently. We don't know if Microsoft will unify the OneNote systems and have them all come under one particular application, but as it currently stands, you have to deal with which one of those 3 that you want to pick to use and then stick with it, because it usually confuses staff if you start to move between them. One of the other considerations you've got is how on earth you want to set up your teams to get your OneNote class notebooks. If you have been in the UK and you've been through one of the DFE funded projects, such as the ones that Turn It On work on, you will have got probably a data sync in your school, and that data sync links up with the MIS system, and it transfers data out of the MIS system and into Office 365, where it will create not only accounts for pupils and students and staff, it will attach them to the correct teams so that you don't have that administrative burden. And Microsoft had a product for that called School Data Sync, which was recently updated, and there's lots of other products out there that do similar things. The other side of the coin will be that someone's created all of the pupil and student accounts and the staff accounts, and you have to manually go and add them into your class team so that they all get access to the OneNote class notebook that we're going to see. Once you get them, there's lots of sections in there, things like content libraries, you'll be able to see a collaboration space, and also student notebooks for individual students. And then following that, we'll have a look at how to build out those pages, how to bring the pupils with you on the learning journey, and how to share and distribute. Before I go into showing you that, has anybody got any questions relating those different versions of OneNote, or how to get to them inside their teams? So you can either pop a question in the chat or you can unmute and speak to me, but remember, you are being recorded. Nope. Okay, I'll continue. With the OneNote itself, we will swap over now and have a look at one inside of an example team. So I'll just leave the presentation and I'm going to join you up with my demo OneNote. So when you land, first of all, in Teams, I'm going to use the web version of Teams. I'm not going to use the app today because not everybody has the app installed. So you can use Teams in one of two ways. You can create a new classroom if you've got the privileges to do so over here. So you go to create a team, create a team type, and you choose class, and then you need to give that class a name. So it might be that it's for a physical class in your school, it might be for an intervention group. You give it a description, and then it's created. And when you create it, if I jump back here, it'll end up appearing somewhere as one of these tiles or a vertical list, depending on how you're organizing your Teams view. And then you just go inside that class team. Once you're inside of it, you'll notice the tabs along the top, which are covered in some previous sessions. And today we are solely going to focus on the OneNote class notebook tab, which is there. The first time you arrive in your team, you will have to activate your team for your team to become visible to your pupils. But also, when you first come to your class notebook in your new class team, you will have to create your class notebook, and it will have a little picture which looks something like this in the middle of the screen, and underneath it says either create a new class notebook or create one from a template. As you get more experienced at adopting the use of OneNote class notebook, you can create template layouts so that every single time you don't have to reinvent the wheel and recreate all your sections. And it might be in some cases you have a single OneNote template for the entire school, but in primary schools it tends to be that you have them for different educational phases, so you'd have a different layout for Key Stage 1 versus Key Stage 2. If you're in a secondary, they often are organized by subject, and each subject coordinator, your head of maths, science, and so forth, would create their template they want to have, so that the subject teachers in a secondary can just pull in the template layout, and it's standard to how they want it to be within their school. But for the argument of today, I've just gone ahead and created in this primary version a really simple layout with a few example students here at the bottom, and I've selected some sections that would be common to a primary classroom scenario, and I've decided to organize mine via subjects. One of the first things that I want to get you orientated with is the fact that OneNote, you can think of it like a digital notebook, but it can reflect the notebook that you have in reality. And think of it like a ring binder or a lever arch file, and inside that lever arch file you will have sections, and the sections in the OneNote can reflect that. They normally are cardboard dividers with little paper tabs on them, and they could be numbered, or you might write what each that section is, and that's why these sections are divided up here. You may end up with subdividers as well inside your lever arch file. So here in my a section called collaboration space, which I'll explain what it is in a little bit. I've divided my subsections up into subjects. I've got my English and maths, and I've got something in there called class charter as well. Then inside of those sections, you might file pieces of hole punched paper. They could be lined, they could be square, they could be plain, but they sit inside those cardboard dividers which act as the sections here, and then you can pop whatever you like onto your pages. So those pages that you're filing here, you can see has some text on it in this example, but they are just a blank digital canvas. You can add almost anything you like to that blank digital canvas. You could put text, you can ink onto it if you've got a touch enabled device or you're using this on an interactive board. You can add videos, websites, pictures, audio clips. You can even drop physical files onto the surface of the page. There's lots of different ways to use that blank canvas. And the idea behind it from Microsoft is that it will suit you, whatever educational phase you're working in, whether it's mainstream education, FE, HE. This structure is transferable between all those scenarios. And what you do is you choose the sections that reflect the educational phase you work in, and you flesh it out from there to suit the pupils you're working with or the students in the way that you want to then get learning resources to them. It could also work for pastoral reasons, so their class charter would be setting the ethos within my class, getting them to understand my expectations around behaviour, collaboratively working together and so forth. So that blank flexibility is really key, and it really does pay dividends if in the first place you have a second to stop, reflect, and think about what your sections are going to be and how you want them to be structured. If you do miscreate them in the beginning, it's not the end of the world. You can manually add them in, but it tends to be a bit more onerous to then add in the individual sections for every single pupil or student. So it's best if you do that correctly in the first place. Once you've got that set up, you can then start to think about what you're going to do with the individual pages that are inside of those sections. So if I jump over again, and we've got broadly here, before we go to page level, we've got some sections. It may not make sense to you at the moment, depending on how much exposure you've had with your own school. But you've got a collaboration space in a OneNote class notebook, a content library, and a teachers only, and you wouldn't get those in a normal OneNote. It's one of the differences. The collaboration space is accessible by staff and also pupils or students. If you drop something into one of these sections that's a page, so it might be here, I am doing some collaborative work in a primary school about Egypt, and I may want the whole class to dip into this page, and I set off one group looking at housing, another group looking at food, and another group looking at culture. Well, they would be able to, as pupils, either on shared devices, or you've got a laptop trolley, or you're using the IT suite, or if you're fortunate enough, you might even have one-to-one devices. They can get onto a computer and they can start to do some research or type into here using prior knowledge, and they start to then build the picture for the topic of what's happening in their own area of research, but it appears collaboratively for everyone in the class. So as they typed into here or popped in a picture, like you can see, that appears for every other pupil that's on a device and also looking at this page. Sometimes that's what you would like, and other times that doesn't suit. So that's why you've got other broad sections here in OneNote. So if I just collapse that, the next section is called the content library. The content library, you have more control over as a teacher. You can still create these sections and you can add in pages, but for the pupil perspective, you can see here one I had a good scribble on earlier. From the pupil perspective, they are able to see those pages, but what they can't do is edit them and destroy them like they would in the collaboration space. They have to be more respectful. They need to take their own copy. So the way they would do that is to right click over the page and they would say copy. And I'm in as a pupil, a staff member at the moment, and go move copy, and then I come down to, if I was Sydney, I'd only see my name of Sydney. I expand my view, and I might want to pop this into my maths folder, and then I would just see copy as a pupil because I wouldn't see move. I see that as move becoming a staff member and looking into this view. And what that does is it takes a copy, a bit like a physical piece of paper that you photocopied and you might bring into your real classroom. It takes a copy of that piece of digital paper and it moves it into their own folder down the bottom here. So it's a way of them being able to help themselves to a resource if they need it, and it's organized here by subjects. One of the other ways that you can organize these folders in here, these subject sections, they could be weeks of the term, and some schools I choose to work with would organize them as exactly that. They'll put the date in, the week beginning date, and then all the pages in here reflect different subjects that you're working with in a primary setting. If I was a secondary school, it tends to be that a class team is just subject specific, and then you might have all the different sets down the side here for all your different year groups in the school, and then each class set within my subject would have their own OneNote, and then I might organize these slightly differently. They're not necessarily subjects in a primary setting. They may be the subjects within the area that I'm teaching. So if this was science, I might do chemistry, physics, and biology, or I might just have a OneNote for biology alone, and I'm going to go through things like specialized cells and so forth. So you organize it as it suits the subject, and then you could put the pages in following that. Following down from content library, where you can edit as a teacher, but pupils or students can only pick up a copy, you have a teachers only section. And in the teachers only section, it does what it says in the tin. I only see this because I'm in as a staff member at the moment. If I was a pupil logged in here, I wouldn't see the teachers only. It would be invisible to me. But here I can build, in this primary example, my lessons in advance of using them with the class. And I can quite confidently know that I can work on them in here, but the pupils won't see them. And when the time's right, I could say, look, I want to make it available to the pupils, so I'm going to pop it into the content library. If I want them to collaborate on it, I can move it into the collaboration space. So I can right click, I can move copy, and I can either move the original out, or I can keep the original to myself just in case it gets messed up when I share it, or I can copy it out, and I will choose whether I want to send it to the content library and then which section I pop it into, or when it goes out to the collaboration space. I could also choose as a teacher, if I wish to pop it into an individual pupils folder, and there's other ways that I'll show you later on in this demonstration to distribute these pages and get them out so that I can send en masse to end up going into all pupils or selected pupils' different folders in the OneNote class notebook. Before I go any further, are there any questions? I'm just going to come back and have a look in the chat as well about how to organize these OneNotes and how to create your sections, or maybe how you found success in organizing sections in your school. Anybody want to unmute or pop a question into the chat? I'll happily pick it up. Nobody? Okay, I'll continue through. So once you have the pages, you will start to look about what you can do with them. And the key to that are the options and the tabs across here in OneNote. Some people say to me, well, how on earth do I work inside Teams with this big gaping void on the left-hand side? Well, you don't have to keep that. You can either open this up in a dedicated OneNote app, or you can just expand inside of your team and it gets rid of the clutter that you would have had on the side and the lost space. And now I've got more real estate to work in the middle of my screen. It could be that I have this just on my computer and I'm showing it on the board at the front of the class. I could be a pupil with this in front of me on the computer, or I might be about to write on it because I've got a board with a pen or a stylus, and as I write on it, what I wrote on the board would appear in here on OneNote. So there's usually a lot of other products out there or other pieces of software that go with the different hardware manufacturers on the board. But what you don't need to do in the long term is stay with something like Active Inspire or Smart Notebook. You could reflect the use of OneNote Class Notebook as in it's the replacement default go-to for the school, and we then know we have a universal format or a universal file format that no matter what we do, where we go, anywhere in the school, we can always open up our OneNote because we've got OneNote in Office 365. We've also got OneNote in Teams, and there's lots of ways you can copy that content in, whether you convert to a PowerPoint and bring it in, or you can open up your other software and just highlight what's on the page in there, copy it and then paste it into here, and usually it comes across pretty well. You might occasionally, tables are the worst culprit of moving around a bit, and sometimes you might not get a common font. But once I have my page ready, and this is one I was building in the background, I want my Key Stage 2 pupils to be able to work with this. I'm going to go over to the class notebook tab first of all, and we'll focus on how to use that to distribute out. I can, if I wish, distribute an entire section. So if I'd been building in a secondary scenario, I know the next section of biology is around cells and specialized cells, differences between and so forth. I could distribute that entire section around cells into the biology folder of my students that I've got. So it's there and it's ready. They can work through it, and I've got all the pages for what's coming up in that entire unit of work, but they can also use it to go back. So each day of the week when they've been working on a page in the OneNote, they could go back and check something from their prior learning if they wish. It's all going to be there for them, just like they have as a physical paper book. Could be in a normal classroom scenario if devices allow. You might want to use it sparingly if you only got an IT suite that you can book for once a week or something, or you've got a set of laptops you can only get in. But also for distance learning or even blended learning, you could be using this in the classroom, and the resource will be available to the pupils that you have with you in your bubble. But you could also have pupils that are at home logged into devices, maybe with parents, or if they're old enough on their own, also accessing this either in their own time or in the same real time. And whatever they need to get at home is available because it's on the page of a OneNote. So OneNote can bridge that gap of getting the resources out there to the pupils or students and making sure that they have fair access at home like they do in school. Another great way for this is if they're doing homework and they need to go back and check something they did in school, and in a traditional sense they might have a paper book that they've left in the classroom, or maybe you're marking it. Well, if they've used the page in the OneNote, you could still be marking that page, but they would have access to it too. So the access to learning is increased through using OneNote Class Notebook, whereas previously it might have been a barrier if they didn't have their paper book. So you can distribute sections there, and if you do distribute a section, you get a pop-out menu on the side. It will load up. You can either choose the name of your section, or if you're distributing to a new section, if you want to create one, or you can distribute to a new group as well. The other way to do it is to either distribute individually or distribute to a group for just this page instead of the whole section. So if I end up bringing that group distribution out, I can make groups within my class or within my set that I'm teaching. So you all need to differentiate learning, and OneNote can help with that as well. You could have a whole class group, and that's fine. It will just go out to everyone in that group. Or you might have an intervention target group, whether to support learning or extend learning. So here I've got English Set 2. If I went into English Set 2 at the moment, I've only got Susanna in there. I could edit that, and I can choose from my other demo pupils. I want to have Sydney in that group too, and I press save, and then it will update so Sydney's in there. If that changes and a pupil becomes really confident with an aspect of learning and they no longer need support, I could drop them out of that group and add somebody else in. So it's quite flexible how you make your groups. But one of the benefits of having groups are that you don't need to tick every individual 30 pupils or students you've got in front of you all at a time. You can just distribute to a group. So if it was Science Eco group, I can go to next. I can then choose which section I want to distribute it to. So if it was homework, and I can hit the distribute button lurking down there at the bottom. If I didn't want to use group distribution, I can use individual distribution. And in here, this is where I see the individual pupils or students. I've only got 4 for the purpose of this demo, but normally you'd have a whole class set of 30 or 30 plus, depending on class sizes in your school. And let's say here, I just wanted to give this to Henry. So I'm going to tick Henry. I'm also going to tick Sydney. I'm going to tick Susanna, and I'm going to hit next. And then I will need to choose where I'd like this to go to. Well, this is an English piece of work, so I want it to be in their English section. And then at the bottom down here, if I've clicked the English section, I will get the purple distribute button appear. If I hit distribute, What Teams and OneNote Class Notebook does for me is it will take them like physical pieces of paper, like I'm walking around the classroom and I'm dropping it on the desk in front of them, or I've given them a piece to take home for homework. It will send out those pieces of digital paper and it will pop them straight into their folders. So now if I went to Sydney, for instance, and Sydney's homework folder, in there, in the myriad of stuff they've got, is the extended writing task. And what Sydney could do is work on that piece of paper, that digital piece of paper, in her section, and then I could, as a teacher, go in and check that and mark that and amend that, and it wouldn't affect any of the other versions available. So I'm not going to overwrite the one in the content library because I want that to be a blank one, and you can pick that up if you wish as a pupil or a student on your own. I'm not going to have them working together in the collaboration space. They've then got their own piece of work in there because I've either sent it to them prior to the lesson, or I could do that on the fly if you want in the lesson. You saw how quick it distributes. So it can be something that's really easy to do. I suddenly realize that the pupils have completed the work. They've created all the answers I need. And then I need to give them something else to get on with. Well, I might have something up my sleeve. I've got an extended task like this. I just then send that out to either all of the pupils in my class, or I send that out to a selection of the pupils, and I can carry on then working with a table group if I'm running an intervention in my classroom, or I can just keep moving around the classroom to support everyone. It doesn't have to be that suddenly I've got to send someone to the photocopy to copy a piece of paper, or I've got to try and invent something at the front of the classroom. You can take care of it there. So any questions on distributing learning? I can see I've got a question in the chat over here. If you distribute by mistake, can you call them back? You can't call them back. You do have to visit the section of each individual pupil or student, and then you just delete that page by right-clicking over the page and then press the delete button. If you send that out to 30, that is a bit of a faff, but I've not ever seen a tool at the moment from Microsoft where you can call back that distribution that you've sent out and be able to then create it again. So you just want to make sure before you distribute it that it's fully developed, and also that you intend for all those pupils to get it. And the way that I usually manage that quite quickly is to get to the groups section and then add them into the group, so that I know that I don't misdistribute to the whole class if I'm ticking the entire list when I do that individually. Any other questions on that distribution, either via group or by individuals? Great. Let me go back over. And I'm going to pop back up to collaboration space. I'm going to go into something more pastoral this time. So it can be that you could use this to organize resources for your class, but you could, as an individual pupil, use what I'm about to show you to organize your work, your day, or remind yourself of important things you need to do by just having a piece of paper, starting a piece of paper. So I want a new page. I just click new page here, and it might be my to-do list. And if I was doing this in private in my teachers only area, I could have this as a to-do list instead of having a sticky note on my laptop or a sticky note on the desktop of my computer. So on my to-do list, I'm going to have remind me to do my marking. I might have break duty, and I may have a subject meeting at the end of the day. There'll be all those other lovely things that we do. So you can then click on those and highlight them out, and you'll have options then to make them into things like to-do lists. So by one click of a button, my things to do have got tick off lists there, so I can tick them as during the day I've completed those, or I could go back and I can then hit return and I can add in another one. So it might be I've got a parent meeting after school, and I just add that in there because I am a forgetful soul and we're all busy people and we do forget things. It might be that you have a daily to-do list. You might end up saying, look, that's my daily to-do list, and then I have another one down here that's going to be my long-term to-do list. So in there I'm going to have reports, and you can either have the check boxes on the side or you can leave them off. You've got the other options here in this in the home tab to change a lot of the common formatting that you'd have in word processing tools and so forth. So I'm not about to go through them and insult your intelligence by showing you what to do, but a lot of the same formatting options that you would have in Word, you've got here in OneNote, and you can use them on the pages that you've got. If you quickly need to change styles, just like you would in a word processor, you can change from heading formatting to main body of text. You can even move across, and you can use code in here too. So there's lots of scope about how you use things. If you want to make a page stand out, so in here, I will end up with the name on the page because whatever I name it at the top appears over here on the page section, but I can add tags as well. There's lots of different default tags that you might want to then bring in. So it could be that actually my to-do list is a critical, so I can tag the individual section, or I could tag the whole page. So you can add tags in at page level, and you could tick off your to-do list with a to-do checkpoint, and then that appears there for you when you're on the page, and it gives you a flag when you see the top of the page. It's just exactly what your page is about. Or if you've got a lot of pages that are a similar thing, maybe you've got one of these to-do lists for 10 of the pupils in your class because you're working with them on a one-to-one, and it obviously got the pupil name, but you might want to tag it in different ways, or you can have discussion points to discuss with certain people in the school. So tagging is also quite useful there. Another thing you can do is you can add in audio, so you can dictate onto your page, so your to-do list doesn't have to be written text. You could organize your to-do list, and it's going to need to be able to allow me to use my microphone, but on my page it should say, as I'm talking, I'm going to dictate in, and this to-do list is going to be for next week's staff meeting. I want to make sure in next week's staff meeting that we discuss the policies to review, we have a look at use of EpiPens and so forth. So you can dictate in, and I'm going to stop dictation there. And depending on the speed of your internet, it will pick things up. But you can see that you don't have to type into the page. So a game changer for pupils with different abilities or learning needs, they don't have to type in. As you can see there, it's still recording. I'm going to switch the recording off. They can just turn on that tool and they can dictate onto the page. So then all of a sudden, using a keyboard, letters, typing words doesn't have to be a barrier to learning either. And you can have that then read back to you if you want. So you've got accessibility tools in here as well that will help. So if I go across, on the View tab, there's something called Immersive Reader. Immersive Reader is built in through Office 365. We've got a separate session going to be about accessibility tools. But quickly, if I just showed you the same thing in Immersive Reader, just to give you a flavour of what's possible, if I had EAL pupils in my class and I produced this resource, they can translate to different languages. If I had different levels of literacy needs, I can press play, and then depending on the volume on your computer, starts to read it out to you, and you can pause and you can change that, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail when it comes to the accessibility session that we're going to run as one of these MIE webinars. But don't forget, the View tab has Immersive Reader there. It's important to tell pupils about it. It's important for staff because we all appreciate that staff are really busy. There's very little time in the day. Workloads are growing, particularly as we've got our nemesis COVID out there. And the last thing we want to do is have to start to create differentiated sets of learning resources. Well, you can get OneNote to do that for you, and Immersive Reader is just one of those tools there. If this is still too busy over here in View, you can turn it into a reading view, and it gets rid of content, it gets rid of all the tools even more. And there is the Immersive Reader and so forth. You can give feedback to Microsoft in many places, and there is one of those examples of where you can achieve that. So if I went back to my class charter, that reading view is stayed with me, and I can use that to go in and keep that streamlined view there. Any questions on views? I can see that somebody has popped something in there. Oh no, they've just notified me they've joined the meeting. Anybody want to unmute or ask any questions in the chat? I'm happy to go through and talk about those with you. No? Okay. I'll jump back over to the presentation. If I go back into here, with the different pages, there are no limits to what you can do with that page. As I said recently, you can even drop files onto these pages. So instead of you having to use the files section in Teams or attach them to a post, you can simply drop the file onto the surface of the page. And then if they want to get the Word document, or if they want to get the resource, it will open up here in Teams, and they don't have to worry about it. They are just able to carry on with the business of being in one place, either typing on the screen, inking on the screen, dropping their pictures in, and whatever else, and it doesn't have to be a barrier to being successful. I am just trying to get out of that view, which doesn't seem to be at the moment working for me, despite the fact I've just tried to reset it and switch off the reading view. Let me come back out of my Teams and come back into my primary team and go back in and just sort it out that way. So there, in my normal home button, I've got all those options which help me with formatting my page, organizing my page. It doesn't have to be just, as I said, a way just to get learning content across. It can be used for pastoral things. So here I've got my class charter, and it may be that I ask the pupils to tick off in their own version that they've understood this. It could be that because I put it in the collaboration areas, you know what, I would like all of the pupils in my class to be involved here. So then when they've got the opportunity to put their ideas below, they could signify that by putting their name in there after their comment. There's lots of different ways to do it, or you may want them to take a copy of that. You may want to actually send that out. It doesn't have to be that it's just for the single purpose. Somebody's popped a question to chat there. Is there a way to add shapes to notebooks? Yes, there is. Let me just pop over. So on the home, no, on the insert, if you go to insert over here, you've got different options, and in the different options, you should be able to do symbols and shapes. So you can go more symbols, and there usually is a shapes tool up here at the top as well, which isn't there for me today, wonderfully. Yeah, normally there's a shapes option over here by symbol, and you can pop in shapes as well, but you can bring them in from other applications too. So if you had a shape you were using in Word, or you put it into PowerPoint, they will paste readily into here. I'm not sure why that's not showing up at the moment, but yeah, you can drop shapes into the page. So if you were doing a maths lesson and you said, well, what are the properties of these 2D shapes and so forth, yes, you can bring them in. You could also get pictures of those shapes from the internet as well, but normally it's over here on the insert, and if I was bringing in the picture, I could just copy and paste it from the browser. I could bring it in from a file, or if I'd taken a picture, because if I've got a tablet version of a Windows device, I could take a picture of a people's work and I could drop it in here on the page, and then I can annotate over the top at the same time. Hasn't been there for a little while. Okay, I will go and check that, and whether it's a difference between the versions, because I know I was using a version last week, and I think it might have been the Office 29 version, and the shapes tool was still in the Office 2019 version. It might be that they've just updated, because Office 2019 is fairly static, and it might be they've updated the online Office 365 version and taken it out of that, but the update hasn't been applied to the Office 2019. I have Office 29 installed on this computer as well, I'm working on, so I'll have a check of that afterwards. Jumping back over for you. On the insert tab, then, you've got most of the tools that you would normally have on insert in Word or PowerPoint, for instance. So you can, this is where you bring in those other files. So you can either insert them as an attachment, or you can insert them as a printout. So if you had a PDF that you wanted to annotate over the top of, you choose your PDF from here. You pick up your PDF from whichever folder you're going into. So I don't know if I've got a PDF I can use today. I'd had to clear out of my downloads folder. It might be that, no, I haven't got one. It might be that you've got a PDF that you can bring in. Let's see if I've got one in here. Yeah, okay, so they've got one there. I press open and I go insert. And then on the page of my screen here, if I had some questions, that were in the PDF, as long as you've got an ink-enabled device where you can use a stylus, you can draw on top. That's just loading up at the same time. Somebody else put a question. Some shapes are in draw. Okay. The other way of getting your content in is to go insert file and insert as attachment, and then instead of it rendering a version like it's trying to do now while it's uploading, you can then attach it to the surface of the page. The other way in here is to bring pictures in from a file. So you mentioned about things like shapes, or maybe you're trying to reference something else. It mathematically wouldn't be available in shapes. I quite frequently bring in pictures from other web services and drop them in on the page. Obviously, if it's something that's copyrighted, you need to be careful of that. Or if it's also something we don't have that's maybe on a page in a textbook, I quite often take a picture on my tablet device and then I pop it in onto the page there. You can go straight out to online, so you can stay inside your OneNote at the same time. So here is my thing, and I've decided to put in something there about Big Ben. There's my file on my page, and what I could do is I could use the Draw tab, and with my stylus now I could write over the top as well, so I could say this is here, and it would then end up staying on the page in my OneNote, because the draw tools act a bit like the drawing tools in your native software on your smartboard. You could also drop in audio. If this was feedback and I was going down to one of my pupils, and it could be that in my homework folder I've asked dear old Henry here, or actually no, it's my demo student here, to undertake the writing task. Someone's just got their microphone on. If they could just mute that for me, that would be fantastic. And on their page I could leave audio response for them, and I could then type in, if I was going to take this off of draw and there, I could insert an audio comment onto the page, and then that audio comment could be used for leaving feedback, or I could type onto the page and just leave a normal piece of written feedback. So it doesn't have to be that you've got to stay with the normal versions of your feedback. It can be very open in the way that you're doing that. You also have the option in here, as I showed you earlier, to get symbols in. Sometimes, particularly in a secondary teaching scenario, if you're dealing with specialist subjects, be it maths, DT, and also in science, being able to pull those symbols in is quite useful, instead of you having to go and find one and then being able to type them in. You've got maths tool in here as well. So if I went back to home and I go over into there, and I might be in my maths lesson, I've got a set of maths problems, and here I've inked into my page. Let me maximize that. I've typed on the board that I'm just trying to work out what 7 minus 3 plus 2 is. Well, I can lasso that, and when I lasso that, I can get to the maths tool. And on the maths tool, you need to write your equation, and then you need to go and get your text over there on the keyboard. You can highlight your work that you've typed in, and it will get highlighted for you. And then if you click the maths tool, out on the side will up come the maths tool. It turns it into an inked version. So the ink conversion you could use for text that you've written on screen, you can use it for numbers that you've written on screen, and it will do its best to interpret it. Sometimes it is only a computer and it's as good as its programming. It won't always interpret everything correctly. So you can either fix it over here on the fix it button, or you can go back and erase and you can write it in again. Then you can select an action from down here. So you could evaluate, well, what's the answer? It's 6. Well, that's all well and good, but I don't know how we got to that answer. So you can do things like show steps in the solution. And what OneNote will do for you is it will then go through and give you the steps, whether you're a member of staff or whether you're a pupil and you're trying to get through the point of, well, how on earth did I get to 6? What were the steps in successfully getting to the answer? And depending on the complexity of the calculation you are using, it will either be a long solution or a short solution. But I've seen this used from primary school and year 1 right the way through to 6th form and secondaries, and it will cope quite happily with anything up to algebra and so forth. You've got also the Immersive Reader built in there, so if you need to have this read to you because you can't understand these steps and you have a low literacy level so you can't read that, that's fine, that's there for you. The other real benefit of this is that as a teacher, I could put the one calculation on the board, or I could highlight a single calculation out of all the ones that I've completed that day with the pupils, and I could go to generate a practice quiz. And then in here, I'll sign in a moment, what you have is the ability for the Microsoft Forms in Office 365 to do the heavy lifting for you. And based on that calculation or calculations, you can generate a quiz. And it will generate that quiz and drop it onto the page. And there we then have some similar calculations that have been auto-created by Forms with multiple choice answers. So I could go down the page as a pupil, and I don't, as a teacher, have to suddenly recreate a new resource. It does it during the lesson. And I submit it. And Forms auto marks in OneNote class notebook. I don't need to worry about, as a class teacher, running around the classroom and marking that at the same time. So as part of the language homework, I've got a question in here. So as part of the language homework, can students upload their spelling audio file into the class notebook and you give audio feedback? Yes, they could. They could dictate as an audio file, and you can drop that audio file into the OneNote class notebook. So as a teacher, if you are an MFL teacher in secondary or you're delivering languages in primary, you could listen to what they've spoken, and then you could also give audio feedback, and that audio feedback could be in another language. So if you are a Spanish teacher in a secondary school and you're assessing their GCSE Spanish oral work, you could listen to their oral work over distance scenario even. You could then give them that feedback in written form, or you could talk back to them in Spanish, or you could leave that feedback in English, and it could be written or it could also be audio going back. So yeah, there's great scope to use this for various different subjects. The maths tool obviously is going to be useful for maths-based subjects or subjects which use maths as well, but don't forget it's there. It's particularly, I find, useful in a primary classroom setting. It's useful there. Something else that I often use are stickers. So another way of giving feedback could be that I pop in one of these. Oh, it's not going to work. No, I think I'll cancel that. Well, you normally pop in one of these on the page, and then in a bubble by the side, you can leave feedback. It doesn't have to be, it's just primary orientated. There's lots of different types of stickers here. Let's try that once more. See if it's going to have it. Nope. You drop it onto the surface of the page and you leave your feedback. It's a way to draw the attention of the pupil or the student to the feedback on the page, but sometimes the sticker alone can be enough without having to write anything, and it will just go in there. If you do decide that you want to use Forms here inside your OneNote class notebook, you don't have to go to the app launcher. You can pull in a form you've already made, but if you click the Forms button on the side there, it will load up Forms for you. While that happens, I've got another question over here in the chat, which I'll go and pick up. How do you get into the maths quiz? I'll show you that again in just a tick. So it will make Forms come out on the side, which it seems to be having more than a moment, whether my broadband speed is suffering at the moment. And it will bring in the form, and you can either use the form to create a form to gather data. So I might be in science and I might be collecting a data set, and I could use that to create the form where each of the students enter in. So I get a data set that's got 30 entries, and I could analyze that. I could use that for maths as well. I could use that for DT, or it could be that you create a quiz that's just a general quiz, not a maths quiz, and then the quiz is on the page of the OneNote and they can undertake the quiz. And if it was in their own area, you could see just how well they've got on with the quiz, and you could do that for a homework, or you could do that as just part of a general in-class challenge. It might be that you're going to have a mini recap of something you've done from prior learning. So there's various ways to do that. Somebody's just joined the meeting. If you could just mute your microphone for me, because everybody else can hear what you're saying and you are being recorded. If I then go back and highlight this again, I'll show you where to get that maths quiz from.
I remember you saying that before, yeah.
Just going to jump over and mute the person talking.
Yeah.
Okay, that takes care of that. And jump back over into here. So if you wanted to, you highlight your text. So you go to maths tool even. Highlight out. Let me just reload that page. Go back into it. Thank you everyone for your patience. Just reloading the class notebook. And into that section. Go to collaboration space. We'll pick up that maths lesson. So you highlight your text. And once you've got it highlighted, you go to draw. You go to your maths tool. And then after it's interpreted whatever your calculation is on your page, the way that I got that practice quiz there is I would choose evaluate, so it's got there, and then I can generate my practice quiz using the generate a practice quiz button at the bottom. So it's a dedicated use of forms, not by using forms in insert, but it's actually attached to the maths tool here, and it's quite a useful way to just get it to quickly auto generate content for you, and you can do that on the fly, or you could do it in advance and have that up your sleeve and suddenly say, look, here you go, here's 10 questions based on this, or you could go more than 10 questions if you want. So the insert tab, I think we've probably now covered most of the sections on the insert tabs. There's good old emojis there if you want to use them to add that, or you can also add in tools here, and it's more of an advanced feature. But if you find that you've got a tool in the store and you want to add it in, so it's a specific additional add-in to OneNote, and there are various add-ins, you can bring those in as plugins and then they will appear in here. So if you've got a dedicated tool that you want to get to that's not a default, you can add them into the bar. Just going to go over and have a look at the next question. I only get verified when I clicked on select an action. Okay, Paul, I'm not quite sure why that be. That would be, it might be due to an actual setting on your account and permissions that you have to use tools within OneNote rather than OneNote. I haven't ever seen that message before. If you could drop a screenshot into the chat, I can have a look and maybe it will give me a further insight. If you could do a quick screen grab and drop that into the chat, I'm welcome to have a look at that for you. That audio recording button there, so you can press your audio recording. So if this was a page of a pupil, then they've gone ahead and answered those there. You click the audio recording if you're going to give feedback, and it will then load up and start recording for you. So at the moment, it's busy recording. And then when I'm happy, I hit stop, and then it would embed that recording on the page. So whoever was asking about recordings, you can give your feedback that way, but the pupils could then record their own Spanish NFL audio, and then they could drop that in there too. If I come out of the audio tab and I go across to the insert tab, there's the audio recording. It's there, so I could play that back. I won't, because you don't want to hear me twice, but it's there. The drawing tools are for inking. So inking is built right into OneNote. You don't need to have a separate set of tools or go to the inking tools down here at the taskbar at the bottom of your window. You can do it right inside. It's got most of the common features that you need. It's got your pencil, your eraser, highlighters. It's got a lasso tool, so you can lasso out and highlight. That lasso can be free flow or it can be rectangular. You can change the color of your inks, you can change the thickness of your inks, and that's where the maths tool is too. So it's got a lot of the basic functions that you can use. And if you have taken a picture of something, maybe you've got a visualizer or you're working on a tablet and you drop that picture in, I quite frequently use these inking tools to annotate on top of somebody's work. If I had a section of text and maybe we're doing some spag work in primary and we're looking at the punctuation and the full stops or the capital letters or whatever it is we're looking at our spag, I could take a picture from a pupil's book. I could drop it in here like the page I did with the Big Ben text from that PDF file. And then I could annotate it with the class in real time, or I could take my own version of spag work and get them to critique it so they could all have a go at annotating over the top. And if I wanted it collaboratively, I'd drop it into the collaboration space, or I might want them to get their own copy and content library, or I could just send it out to their individual folders. So there's quite a bit of scope as to which way you want to use those inking tools, but they're all there inside, so you don't have to necessarily have a separate product or a separate piece of software. We used View a little bit earlier, but you've got various ways to navigate. So you can hide everything. You can just see sections and pages, or you can see pages only, and that hides the sections. That's where I got to Immersive Reader and Reading View. You could also here change page color for accessibility reasons. So if I clicked on the page, I can change my page color background there. You could also go to different page versions, and if I'd use this one a lot, I can roll back to previous page versions. And then in here I've got various tools to show authors, and usually on the ellipses you can check accessibility there as well. I've got what's called a simplified ribbon at the moment. It means it's not wider and it hasn't got too many options displaying at once. Certainly for pupils it tends to be a lot more accessible way of getting in. The Help tab is really for you to give feedback to Microsoft, or also to get the help guide here that you've got inside of OneNote. I can see I've got a couple more questions over there. Paul's given me his picture of what he's getting, and you've got verify. Okay, Paul, that looks to me like you haven't got access to the full set of tools, because you, as you saw in that demo, have the evaluate as well as the verify and several other tools there. Let's see, you've got stickers working for you, because I haven't. I would get whoever you've got, Paul, at your school as your IT consultant. If you have a turn it on consultant, raise a support ticket and get them to check your account settings in the Teams admin center and just check that you've got the correct permissions to use all those tools, because it doesn't look like you have from that screenshot you've just sent across. Just come out of that. Any other questions relating to the tabs there in OneNote? No. Okay. The next question for most people is then, how do I start sharing these and how do I share them out? If you've spent time using your class to build really good pages in your OneNote, what you can do inside of Teams is that you can pick up those OneNote pages from inside Teams and you can share them out, or you can add them in to other areas. So if you've got a OneNote page and you've made that OneNote page and you want to, for instance, in your assignments, and you can use assignments for homework mainly, or piece of distance learning work, and we covered this in one of the previous sessions. But if I was going in and I was making an assignment in here, I can pick up the OneNote page from my class notebook when I go to attach resources. And in attach resources, there I could go to my class notebook and I could assign the pages from my class notebook directly inside of my assignment. So that might be the resource that I attach, and it could be that we've made it in class during the week or during the lesson, and now I want to extend that into homework and I want them to take it one step further. Well, they can use OneNote class notebook and they can carry on inking onto that page or typing onto that page, but you've got various ways that they could pick it up, either by sending it to their folder down here or attaching it to an assignment over there, and then they will quite happily carry on working on that. And if you're doing it on an assignment, it's assigned to them as an individual anyway, so you'd be able to go back and check their work on a one-to-one. With the insert link can be used in here. I've got it attached to the text maths, but if you had the URL from another website, so let's say we were looking for a maths YouTube clip, and in that YouTube clip I have got that one there. I'm just going to pause that when it comes up, but I'm going to take the URL and I'm going to pop that URL over into here. You can insert your YouTube videos and they'll go directly onto the page of your book. So it's as easy as that. The only thing I would advise checking, and people sometimes suffer as a consequence of it, is that school filtering on broadband is really good. But staff can sometimes have one level of YouTube filtering and it's more open. It allows you to get your YouTube clips because you may use them in your teaching and they add value to your lesson. But when you roll them out to pupils or students, because it picks up the filtering when they're logged into a laptop, it may end up blocking YouTube so they can't pick up the video on their page. So you just want to check in advance of using YouTube videos in your school that YouTube videos aren't blocked and that they would be accessible, because there's nothing worse than having maybe a lesson starter or an input in the middle of a lesson. It's entirely dependent upon this YouTube clip and they can't watch it and they can't access it. It sort of throws a spanner in the works. And I've had it happen to me because I teach in different schools with Turn It On, and it can really make your life difficult because all of a sudden you're trying to interpret what they should just be picking up. Just interrupts the flow of the lesson. I'm going to jump back over to the presentation that I started in earlier, and we'll continue through there. Any questions while I'm just swapping over? No? Okay, so you should now see my presentation. With the tools that you've got available to you, you've got the ability, as I said, to annotate up the work. So I said earlier, I quite frequently capture pictures of student work. So here it is a difference between plant and animal cells, and we're looking at the sections that make up the cells. In this instance, they've had to, on a paper worksheet, write on the labels for what things are, such as cell walls or mitochondria or whatever you're looking at. I can then get them to take a picture of that if it was maybe a PDF or a piece of work in their book. And this is certainly easier with secondary students than it is in a primary setting. And if you're doing this through distance learning, you can get parents to help you out and possibly take pictures and then upload them onto the pages of the workbook, but you may not always have a parent that can help at home with that. So then you can annotate over the top, and if you are giving feedback, it can be a quick tick with the stylus if you've got a touch enabled device, or you can give the written comment on the side. I often get asked, well, that's great, Martin, but where are some good courses to get me started? There are two really good courses on the MEC, the Microsoft Education Center. One is called Getting Started with OneNote, and the other one is called OneNote Class Notebook, and it's a bit of a teacher's all-in-one guide to getting students in and using it. So I'd recommend those. For using Teams and OneNote together, I'd still say to reference the Teams directory, which I referred to in the previous webinar, but there's also a dedicated OneNote directory for Microsoft that's really useful too. So those resources are quite handy to go and pick up. With the areas that we're covering today, it fits into a bigger program of MIE courses that we're running. So last time we looked at Teams for remote learning, and then today we focused in on using OneNote Class Notebook. Next time we'll look at the learning tools that will be across all of OneNote, Teams and M365, and there's many of them that are very beneficial to helping you engage pupils in the learning or getting them access to learning where it was previously would have been a barrier. The last bit is using Flipgrid, which is a app that links into Office 365, but it's really good for pupil voice informative and summative feedback, and you can book up for those using the link that I've given you before. Before I go any further, are there any final questions on OneNote before we move on to other sections today? Either feel free to drop them into the chat, or you can just unmute and talk to me. Silence. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm just going to stop the recording at this point, so the rest of the meeting won't be recorded. And